What's up, folks? I'm Jalyn. I'm a lactation consultant and mother of two beautiful children. So today we're going to talk about 5 things that lead to low milk supply. Okay. So low milk supply is the number one reason why moms stop breastfeeding. The number one reason. Now, sometimes the issue isn't actually low milk supply, but it's a perception that there's a low milk supply. And I can talk about that topic later, but there are definitely some situations where moms actually do end up with low milk. Let's talk about it. The number one reason why mothers tend to end up with low milk supply is just a numbers game. In order for milk production to be optimal, the breasts need to be emptied a minimum of 8 times in 24 hours. Minimum 8, at least in the first 2 to 3 months. Now, after that time has passed, some moms can get away with breastfeeding or pumping less than 8 times a day. But in the first 2 months, when your milk supply is being established, it's very important that your breasts are being emptied 8 or more times in 24. In the breastfeeding support world, we have this little rhyme, 8 or more in 24, 8 or more in 24. So remember that, 8 or more in 24. So that kind of brings us to the second reason why moms end up with low milk supply. And it's because for one reason or the other, the baby isn't actually emptying the breast. So they might be breastfeeding 8 or more times a day, but they're not actually emptying the breast well. So in some cases, you may have a baby that doesn't have a great latch. And so when the latch is poor, the baby is not able to transfer the amount of milk that they need, which means that they usually won't get full off of just the breast. But it can also end up eventually leading to a low milk supply because when breasts are emptied, they tend to fill back up with milk. Sometimes you will hear people say supply and demand, but it's actually a demand and supply. You have to demand that your body makes the milk. If you want your supply to be good, you have to demand it. So the more the baby breastfeeds, the more the breasts are emptied by baby breastfeeding or pumping, the higher your supply will end up being. So poor latch is definitely an issue for a lot of moms, especially in those first couple weeks. And those first couple of weeks is when your supply is being established. So if you get off to a bad start and you don't get the latch addressed early on, then a month or 2 down the line, you might be in a situation where you're not quite making enough milk. So I guess the question next is, how do you know if your baby doesn't have a good latch? Often you will have sore nipples. That's usually a clear indicator. If your nipples are very sore, so we're not talking about a little tenderness. That's pretty common to have some tenderness in the first week or 2, but any tenderness should be pretty much gone by the 2nd to 3rd week. It shouldn't be getting worse. You shouldn't be seeing nipple damage like cracks or abrasions. Those are signs that there's a poor latch. Even if you're pumping and you're not using the right flange size, the flange is the part that goes on your breast, if it's not fitted correctly, that can also lead to poor milk supply because, again, the pump is not able to empty the breast well, and over time end up with a lower milk supply. So you want to definitely get the latch checked. If you're having sore nipples, don't hesitate to reach out to the lactation consultant. I've heard moms say that, when I was in the hospital, the nurse looked and said, it looks good, and sent me on my way. But by the time I got home, by the 3rd, 4th day, my nipples were hurting so bad, but I was told that the latch was great, so I didn't seek out any more help. I just suffered through the soreness. Sometimes the nurses don't actually know what a good latch looks like. They don't necessarily have the level of expertise to really assess that. You definitely should seek out assistance from an actual board-certified lactation consultant to address any latch issues or any concerns about latching. And definitely, if you don't see the lactation consultant in the hospital, when you get home or on your way home, call somebody and try to get that assessed and evaluated as early as possible. Even if you saw one in the hospital, a lactation consultant in the hospital, and she said, it looks fine, things might change by day 3 or 4 for different reasons. The third thing that contributes to low milk supply is supplementation, especially supplementation with a bottle. Because one, babies feed differently on a bottle versus a breast. They don't have to open their mouth as wide. They have a different sucking motion. The bottle feeding is more passive, and breastfeeding has to be definitely more active and requires more muscle, not just jaw movement, but tongue movement on the baby's part. So if you introduce too many bottles in those first couple weeks, it can confuse the baby and make the baby not suck effectively at the breast. So if you are worried about whether or not the baby is getting enough milk, before you introduce that bottle, again, get things assessed. A lactation consultant can do pre and post feed weights, and that means they weigh the baby before the feeding, and then they weigh the baby after the feeding, and then they can do a little math and determine how many ounces your baby is actually taking from the breast. Now, obviously, if you're only looking at one feeding, she's just assessing one feeding, you can't base a whole day of feeding on one feeding. But at least it gives you an idea of, okay, my baby might be drinking 2 to 3 ounces on average per feeding. So then you can say, okay, over a course of a day, my baby is probably getting enough milk, right? So I don't need to supplement. He's getting enough milk to gain weight appropriately. So in a 24-hour period, most breastfed babies need, after the first month, they need anywhere from 24 to 32 ounces of milk every 24 hours. It's less than that in the first month, but after the first month, it's about 24 to 32 ounces per day. So again, you can get that assessed, but you can also, if you're wondering if the baby's gaining enough, if the baby's getting enough breast milk to gain enough weight, you can take the baby to your pediatrician for a weight check. You don't have to wait until the 2-month checkup if you're really worried about it. You can just call your doctor and say, hey, I'm concerned about the baby's weight gain. Can I just bring the baby in quickly to do a weight check? And if you have a breastfeeding friendly doctor, they should be okay with that. If not, one thing that you can do is use a scale at home. And what you can do is weigh yourself, then weigh yourself with the baby on your scale, and then subtract those two numbers. So obviously the second number should be higher than the first. It's not going to be as sensitive as a scale that can weigh how much milk the baby is taking in ounces. But it can give you a rough estimate of how much the baby has gained over the course of, let's say, a week. Don't do this every day because you'll drive yourself crazy being worried, but do this after a week. Babies on average gain 5 to 7 ounces per week, so in 7 days. So let's just say your baby is currently 9 pounds 2 ounces. Today is May 21st, I think. So you weigh the baby on May 21st, you write it down or you put it in your phone, save it in your phone, and then on May 28th, a week from now, you weigh the baby again, and you see that the baby now weighs, 9 pounds 2 ounces. Now your baby weighs 9 pounds 10 ounces. You're like, woohoo, my baby gained more than average. So I know for sure things are going in the right direction. Now, if your baby's maybe borderline, like he's at the low end. Maybe the baby was 9.2 at the first weigh-in, and then a week later he was 9.7. You might want to talk to a lactation consultant to get things assessed, just to make sure you're on the right track with the weight gain. This is something you can do to avoid unnecessary supplementation. Sometimes it's hard you can't really look at your baby and see that he's gained half a pound in a week. Maybe someone who isn't there every day could see that, but when you're just taking care of your baby on a daily basis, 24/7, you can't necessarily feel like a difference in the weight gain. So you might worry, oh, I don't know if baby's gaining weight. Or if your baby's cluster feeding a lot, maybe he's going through a growth spurt, you might worry that he's gaining enough weight. So you can do a basic weight assessment just on your own digital scale at home. If you just want to know right away what's going on, just go directly to this a good source, which would be your lactation consultant. So don't supplement without getting some expert advice on that, because it can lead to not only your baby not feeding well at the breast, but actually rejecting the breast. Sometimes babies will prefer the fast flow of the bottle over the breast because the breast does not flow as fast, and they start to reject the breast. So we don't want that. So number 4, the number 4 reason why you may end up with low milk supply is you wait to get help. So we already addressed this, but just holding off on getting help because A, you don't want to spend the money, or B, you just think you should be able to figure out on your own. That can, really mess up your supply later on down the line. In one of my last videos, I talked about the importance of saving up money, budgeting for lactation support. Hopefully you do that prenatally. You set aside $300 to $500 in case you do need that support, and you don't have to worry about getting that money together. But in some situations, I think it's worth, if you have to borrow that money or put it on a credit card, or ask the grandparents to invest in their grandchild and give you that money as a gift so that you can get the lactation support you need. Definitely it's worth doing that. Instead of trying to wait it out. Oh, it's going to get better. Oh, sore nipples are normal. No, sore nipples are not normal. Sore nipples are common. Having sore nipples is common, but it's not normal. And again, it can lead to low milk supply later down the line if you don't get it addressed. And the other thing is, you don't have to figure this out on your own. We know, yes, of course, breastfeeding is natural, but it's not always easy, and it doesn't come naturally. Even though it is natural, it doesn't always come naturally, because in this day and age, we're not used to seeing moms breastfeeding. We haven't grown up in a breastfeeding supportive environment where we see people breastfeed, and we hear stories of moms having a lot of success with breastfeeding. We're not there yet. 100 years ago, maybe 100 years ago, that was the case. All this professional help wasn't necessary. But it is now, because we had 2 generations that didn't breastfeed. So if your mom didn't breastfeed, how are you going to know how to do it? So don't put those expectations on yourself to just figure it out and know what to do, because that's not how things are right now. And hopefully we'll get to that point where it is just natural, and maybe our children, the kids coming up now, it will be that way for them, hopefully, where the next generation is totally comfortable and confident with breastfeeding, and it does come naturally for them. But for now, we got to get the help when we need it, okay? And so the last thing that can contribute to low milk supply are medical reasons. So there are several medical conditions that can contribute to low milk supply or can impact the milk supply. Obesity. So I would say basically any conditions that may be hormonally driven. So obesity, thyroid conditions, diabetes, PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and infertility issues. If you have one or more of those conditions prenatally, or even before you got pregnant, you may be at risk for a low milk supply. So I would say definitely, if you have any of those conditions, it's really good to seek out recommendations from a lactation consultant while you're still pregnant, so she can give you recommendations on how you can reduce your risk of low milk supply and things that you can do to increase your chances of having a good milk supply. And actually, one more thing that I want to bring up as the 6th thing that might lead to low milk supply is nutrition. Not getting enough food, not getting enough calories. It is very common that mothers in those first couple weeks are just not eating enough. They're not getting enough calories. Why? Because there haven't been any plans put in place to make sure that the mom is eating regularly and Again, having a low caloric intake can cause low milk supply. So if you're taking in less than 1,500 calories a day, you just don't have the fuel to produce milk. It just comes down to that. If you just have one bad day where the baby was constantly breastfeeding or constantly crying and you can barely get a bite to eat, you didn't have anyone else in the home to help you didn't get to shower, you didn't get to eat, and it was just a cluster. Having one day like that is not gonna necessarily hurt your milk supply, but having several days or weeks of that, like just chronic poor nutrition, poor caloric intake, can cause low milk supply. Iron is a really important thing to consider, making sure you have iron-rich foods in your diet, but also you need to think about what your iron levels were, what your hemoglobin levels were before you actually gave birth. Prenatally, what were your hemoglobin levels? Were they high? They do check your hemoglobin levels during your pregnancy, but you want to make sure they stay. You do what you're supposed to do to keep your levels in the normal range. So that may be through food or supplementation with iron supplements. But after you have a baby, the process of childbirth can cause significant blood loss, especially with cesarean section and sometimes even with vaginal. There can be significant blood loss. So if you have been told that you had significant blood loss during the birth, even if sometimes they don't check your iron levels after the baby's born, but if you've been told that you've had significant blood loss, you should be very focused on making sure you get your iron levels back up to normal. So definitely eating a lot of iron-rich foods, like your dark leafy green vegetables, a lot of cooked greens, red meat if you eat meat, salmon, dried fruit like raisins and dried apricots, things like that. Beans, black beans, red beans, things like lentils. All those things are typically a little bit higher in iron. Even iron-rich breakfast cereals can help. But definitely focus on that when you think about the meals that you're going to be preparing. But also, again, prenatally, put in place a system where you won't have to worry about cooking, where if someone's going to be cooking for you, providing meals, maybe you do a meal train. If you go to mealtrain.com, you can request that friends and family contribute to providing meals for you for the first, 4 to 6 weeks. So you don't have to worry about it. You can just go in your fridge and grab something, warm something up, and there you go. And if you don't feel like you have that support, you can cook some meals ahead of time and put them in your freezer. Have different things available after you've given birth, just so you can make sure that you're getting nutritious foods in your diet. Yeah, so that's it for today. I would love to hear what things you feel may have helped you avoid low milk supply, or what things do you feel like contributed to your low milk supply if you had that experience, unfortunately. I'd love to hear your comments. If you like this video or if it helped you, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'm looking forward to hearing your comments and seeing you on the next video. Take care.